everybody. Welcome to another episode of What Lights Your Fire. Today, we have Danielle Marshall with us. Danielle is the founder of Culture Principles, and I'm really excited because her work definitely falls in my passion and what lights my fire. So let's just get right into it. And Danielle, tell us about yourself and tell us about what lights your fire.
So, Dee, first off, thank you for having me on. Really a pleasure to be able to sit with you today and just talk a little bit. I love this question of what lights your fire is. I think I have gone through many evolutions over the course of my life and definitely from a professional standpoint. But there are some things that feel like they've been hallmarked almost the whole time is through threads. And I was thinking about this question, and I think I am really lit up right now by this idea of helping both people and organizations find their authentic voice. And why that matters to me right now is I feel like we are in a day and age where there are so many forces, whether they are systemic or individuals or just norm that are trying to move us into patterns of where we subscribe to what other people believe. So our authentic self is colored, if you will, by how other people choose to define us. And I really just want to get to a point where people are able to lean fully into their authenticity to just be them.
And what are the benefits of that? I feel like we talk about authenticity, but I really don't always feel that people understand why authenticity and why we need it in the workplace.
Yeah. So that's a hard question almost to answer in the sense that I think that the response is different for each person. When I think about what I guess is important, even in my journey to my authentic self, and I will say it is still evolving because I'm learning about myself every day.
Right.
I'm thinking about things that matter to me ultimately, right? What are the values that I particularly hold? What are the things that I'm trying to accomplish in my life, whether it be for myself, my business, my family, or friends? And what are the steps that I need to take there? And can I do that in a way that feels natural and authentic for me? And I think that that's the really important thing because I keep having these conversations about success, and people are like, if you want to be successful, you have to do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
But that is premeditated on the understanding that we define success the same way.
Exactly. Yes.
And that's not necessarily true. And so I think even in being authentic, I'm not just talking about show up and behave any way you want. There's always consequences for how we show up in the world, right?
100%.
So if you do something that is completely out of line with certain norms and laws and things like that, there will be consequences for your action. But I think when I'm thinking about authenticity, it is more about who are you at your core, right? So if I want to define success in a way that you don't necessarily define success,
Right.
that is me being authentic. Maybe I don't want to be a multimillionaire. Maybe I don't want to be an Instagram influencer. Like, I don't know what it is that comes up for people in terms of how I don't want to be a CEO like that. There may be different things that people say are measures of success, but what matters to you at the end of the day?
Exactly. And so I feel like when it does, does it what matters to you outside your body and what matters to you inside your body? Because I just triggered something there.
Yeah, I love that. I think they're interconnected in a way, right? So people, you said what lights your fire. I often ask people like what sparks joy inside of you. That is very much an internal facing thing.
Yeah.
Same with lighting your fire. I think that's internal, right? No one else has to be involved in the process. You're not asking for external validation on it. It's just the thing that brings you alive.
Yeah.
And so when I think
Beautiful.
about that is internal, but I think there are elements of it. It's the manifestation of what lights your fire or what brings you joy that becomes external facing. I love having conversations with people, right? But that's driven by something inside of me. I love the connection. I love opportunities to empower. That has nothing to do with anyone else. That is an internal Danielle thing.
Right.
But what I do for a living as a result is that manifestation brought to life because I want to connect. I want to facilitate. I want to get on a stage and talk to as many people as possible because I love that connection.
Right.
That really lights me up.
Yeah, and you're spreading that fire too, because you're spreading that to other people, and you never know what you'll spark in someone else either, and what will get them fired up and started.
I'm curious though, as you ask that question, do you view it also as internal, external? How do you see that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking that. So it's for me, it's very much internal, but I have external factors affect it for me, which is still something that I'm trying to not have be the case. But I was in a burnt out situation for a long time, so it took me a while to figure out what lit my fire anyways, even though it was always there, but I didn't really know. So once I got rid of the external part, then I could focus on the internal part, and then it beamed out of me. So if that answers your question.
Yeah. I mean, it does, especially again, I think this goes back to this idea of success, right? And like how we define success. When I think about how other people might define it and then put you in this box,
Yep.
I'm always asking this deeper question of who does this ultimately serve?
Yeah.
Someone sees this as valuable, and there's a reason that they see it as valuable. What is that reason? And then I have to also turn it inward on some level because I'm asking, does that particular value or definition of
Right.
success serve me? I look at what's happening across our country right now. We've gone through the period of great resignation, and a lot of people are standing up for their rights in a different way.
Yeah.
And folks are just not in a space where hustle culture is something they want to embrace in the same way. And if they are going to hustle, they want to hustle for themselves, not on behalf of a big
Right.
company.
Exactly.
But at some point in time, busyness became a measure of success. But if you're to look at that, it's like, why was that a measure of success? Because who does it ultimately serve? It never served us as the individuals,
No.
but it most certainly served the companies we were working for. I
Right.
need more hours from you. I
Yep.
need more efficiency, do more work. Yes, we're going to constrain your budget. We're going to limit the number of people, but you are going to step up and do this work in this moment. So I'm building a legacy for someone else. I am lining their pockets in this process. That never served me because on the flip side of that, then I end up burnt out, as you just mentioned. I'm exhausted. I'm
Yep.
not spending time with family and friends. And so if I flip that around and I start asking, is this really a measure of success that I want to include in my life? Does this serve me? The answer is absolutely not. If I am busy today, it is busy with intentionality to move me closer to my goals,
Right.
my authenticity, not because someone else said to
Right.
be successful, you have to be the first in the office, the last out the door at the end of the night. That is not a measure of success I'm even trying to live up to.
Exactly. And I feel when you try to live up to, that's when the burnout starts happening because you're watering yourself down with your authenticity, but you're like you said, you're building someone else's legacy. And we all know with corporations are all replaceable. And I feel like I want to put myself in a position where I'm building my legacy and I'm not replaceable, right? Because this
Yeah.
is only what I can do and how I show up in the world and what I can give the world.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting too, because we're both entrepreneurs, right? So
Yeah.
I am very much right now, I know as you are, about building our own legacies, building
Yep.
our own companies out. But I don't want to dismiss the people that sort of fall in the middle also.
Right.
I think we've definitely moved away from hustle culture, but there are people out there who are very happy.
Right.
Not just content, but they're happy
Happy.
working for other companies. They realize that they may be building a legacy, and it's not necessarily just for someone else. Sometimes it's for a company,
Right.
but sometimes, like I come from the nonprofit sector. When I think about the work that a lot of people do there, they're building something on behalf of a social movement, on behalf of making our world better. And so it is about, I think, the collective that matters greatly for a lot of individuals in those cases. But that is again why I come back to what is your measure of success? Because I would not poo them. Like I spent 20
No.
years in the nonprofit sector. I was really grateful for the experiences that I had and the opportunity to serve my community in ways that felt really meaningful.
100%.
And my definition has changed again. And so we've evolved into this new place. So I think there's space for everyone to exist.
I agree.
What I am really just trying to unroot or uproot for people is, how are you defining it? What does it look like for you?
Exactly. Because not it's and that's when because you had said a box earlier, and when I think of corporate, I often think of they want everything to fit in a box. They want certain people that are going to fit, their mission. And unfortunately, that doesn't leave a lot of room for diversity. But there, like you said, there are people that's what they excel at. They excel at helping others build their companies. And that's even as an entrepreneur. I'm sure you have an assistant, or maybe, will have one day, or whatever, but that person is still helping you, and that might be success for them, that they're helping you build
Yeah.
your brand and you're bringing them with you.
I equate this very much to like, how do we show up in our strengths? Right. Because I think that's also a piece of the authenticity conversation. What my strength is unique to me. When you gather all of my strengths up, that is what is unique to me. Right. I don't have to compete with anyone else because there's only one of me. Right. As there is one of every other person out there. We may do literally the same thing. Both of us are coaches. I guarantee you our styles are different. Our approach is different. And that is not a bad thing, right? It is because it relies on who you are as a person. It relies on your experiences, the things that you think are meaningful. And the reality is there is someone that is just out there right now that they're like, I can't wait to meet Dee. I need specifically what she offers. And so this idea of putting people into boxes, one size fits all approach, it not only limits us as individuals, but I think it limits companies' abilities to be great in their own respect. Because if
100%.
you think there is one right way to move forward in the world, we're in a really bad pattern, if you will, because we are going to miss out on so many opportunities, so much innovation, so many different ways of seeing the world. And that's something that I think we really need to be able to be more thoughtful about. And I would also even just say, like, how can we be more curious? So instead of poo-pooing an idea as, well, we've always done it this way, or we tried that before, it's not going to work. How can I ask better questions to see what might be possible?
Yep. There's the coaching. Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. Because there's that we all have to compete, and someone's going to steal my job, and so on and so forth. There are almost 8 billion people in the world. So there is someone for everybody. You have your people, and they're somewhere. And just because somebody doesn't want me as a coach and they want you, doesn't mean that something's wrong with me. It just means that we didn't jive.
Yeah. The idea even of competition is really interesting because in this country, that's what I would consider very much a dominant culture norm here. It is not everyone's way of being. And I have memories of being an early 20-something-year-old professional and being told you have to make sure that you're cutting edge and you have to compete. And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, you are not my competition. No one here is. And I did not say that from an arrogant standpoint of I'm just so amazing. But I fundamentally believe in this idea of run your own race. I am trying to be a better Danielle than I was yesterday. I'm not trying to be a better Dee. It just doesn't make sense for us to try to keep one-upping each other in that way. When if we were to really spend the same amount of energy, quite frankly, being intentional about how we want to move through the world as individuals or collectives, but we have a particular place that we're attempting to go, instead of being a worse them, because that's what that comes down to. I want to be a better me.
Exactly. And I can't even begin to tell you how amazing that statement is, because I feel like that is the struggle, is that everybody wants to one up one another, when really you should just try to one up yourself and be better tomorrow than you were today. And I feel like it's an easy concept, but it's also difficult in the society that we have in, where everyone's compared to one another. So when everyone's compared to one another, that causes so much anxiety and so much other internal negative feelings.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what it means to me as I explore authenticity as well, is you're absolutely right. Just because I've decided I want to move in a particular direction, it does not mean the world is coming with me. They don't necessarily embrace what I am believing in this moment. But the question that I am constantly asking myself is, am I okay with that? What are the boundaries I will uniquely set up for myself? You don't have to agree with me, but if it's a boundary that I am enforcing for myself, that is leaning into my authenticity. And having said that, it may also be Authenticity may look a little bit different. Like maybe I'm okay with that. And that's authenticity too, is that I
Yeah.
just want to blur the lines occasionally.
Yeah.
That's what I mean when I say, what is right for you? Does it
Right.
serve you? How are you looking to show up in this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So how would you start working with your clients if you recognize that maybe you have a client that is struggling with that authenticity? So how would you approach that to begin with?
Yeah. I think that the first question really comes down to tell me a little bit about you. What are your values? What matters to you? I think a lot of times especially if I'm putting my coach hat on, I am
Right.
noticing things in individuals that they may not be able to necessarily name themselves, but
Yeah.
there's a thread of the way they're using language. And I'm like,
Right.
it seems if I can offer this for you, what I'm
Yeah.
hearing is XYZ feels. So I think that's the place that I would start with people. But I think the other piece of it is it's visioning exercises, right? If
Yeah.
there were no constraints on you, time, resources, expectations of the world, who would you be?
I love those exercises because I do the in if it's 10 years and you have 10 years in the future and you have everything that you need, you have all the skills that you need to do your job, you have all the right people in the place, money's not a a problem. Where are you? What are
Yeah,
you doing? And it's amazing to me what people will come up with when they strip everything that's unnecessary.
absolutely. I sometimes as I'm talking to people, even as coaches, like we will coach each other periodically. And sometimes I hear my values playing out in ways that I don't expect. I was on a
Yeah.
call yesterday and someone was asking me, what would it mean if you made $1 million? So you're at 1 million. What changes in your life? And there are lots of dimensions, right? We could think about where we live, what we drive, what we do with our family, where we work. Lots of things could potentially change. But one of the things that they mentioned to me in particular was, would you buy like a new car? And I said, no. And I joke because I always talk about I'm going to drive the car I have until the wheels fall off. And they pushed back a little bit, right? Like I say that. And they pushed back in the moment and they said, is that coming from a place of scarcity? Meaning, money, you may not have money to buy a
Oh,
car yet.
yeah.
And I thought about it for a second and I was like, no, actually, it doesn't come from a place of scarcity. For me, it is aligned with a value that I have around sustainability. I don't know that we always need to be consumers of everything just because I have the resources to purchase it. And so, as I was saying that out loud, like again, when I told you authenticity is blooming for me like every day, I'm realizing there's something else that was there that was unspoken until I had that conversation. I am not a consumer in the traditional way. I will buy what we need. I want to be comfortable. I want my family to have what they need, but I don't feel a constant pressure to have the latest iPhone or
Right.
buy whatever it is that is new and great on the market. I just
Right.
don't have that feeling because it's not related to money. It is related to more of a value around why. Who
Yeah.
told us we needed to purchase all these things?
Society.
But who told me my happiness was going to be built on the back of owning
Yeah.
another item?
Yeah, and I feel like it's sticky when you get into that because then you have is your viewpoint or your authenticity isn't materialistic. And if it is, that's okay if for you if you're happy with that, but really authenticity should be so much more than that materialistic thing. But if that's who you are,
Yeah.
then that's who you are.
Yeah, I don't have any judgment about it. If
Right.
that is what literally floats your boat and you're happy
Exactly.
having the newest thing. I think about so many men in my world that they love the newest gadget, right? Like
Yeah.
even in the
My
kitchen,
husband.
they're like, yeah, there's the whatever, the microwave 3000 does this thing and it beeps and
Yeah.
it does. And I'm like, I really could care less about that. I'm like, does it cook
Hmm.
my food? Does it warm things up?
Yeah.
That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
But for them, that is a part of sort of their persona. That's what they enjoy. It's almost hobby. And I'm like, I wouldn't want to take that away from
Yeah.
you.
Mm-mm.
But I am very much about understanding the underlying factors. Why are we so attached to certain things, ideas? Why are we excited about certain hobbies? And it's not to say that I'm asking this question to judge it. I just want us to understand. Like, how
Yeah.
can we be more introspective?
Yeah, and you got a good point when you said, I'm not saying this to judge it, because I feel like for some people, it may come across as judging, but I feel like maybe you're just an out loud processor. Because I know for myself, I'm an out loud processor and I'll say things like, oh, I have this to do and I have this to do. And it might come across as I'm complaining, but I'm really just stating it. So I think,
I would absolutely say I'm an out loud processor, but I think there's also more to that for me. As I shared, like I really enjoy talking and I love the idea of empowering people. My mind is set up in such a way that like I bounce from idea to idea constantly. Like it's ping pong in my head. And I think sometimes when I process out loud, part of that is to help people understand me a little bit better, but also to how I'm making sense of the world, right? So like I may not say it as a judgment. It's this is how I arrived at the way that I am thinking about this. But what additionally feels important is to be able to then turn around and ask the other person, how do you see this? I know I don't have the only perspective in the room. I don't think my perspective is always right. And I'm legitimately curious. Like, how are you seeing this? How did you interpret those words? What's of value to you?
and maybe they also have something that maybe you're missing, right? Maybe they have a perspective or a trigger word or something that you didn't know you need, but if you weren't open to that conversation, then you wouldn't have gotten it.
Yeah. And that frequently happens, right? Because we only can see the world through our particular lens. And
Exactly.
in my work, the other side of things that I'm focusing on constantly is cultural competencies. And like I would make no indication that I understand all cultures, right? Like I'm still even learning my own culture because there's so much in terms of nuances and things that are changing on a regular basis
Right.
that it is a constant opportunity to just learn and to dive in. And so from that perspective, curiosity has to lead the way for me because I really do want to understand what is important to people about a particular thing they're talking about, like how they understood that. There's so many questions I could potentially ask, and not to question people to death, so to speak, but
No.
how do we build our understanding?
Yeah.
How do we sit in dialogue, particularly across difference? I find those to be some of the most interesting conversations when someone can surface a perspective that I'm like, huh,
Yeah.
I actually never thought about that before.
I
I
love
really
that line.
appreciate that.
I love that line. That is one of my favorite things that a client could ever say to me is, I never thought about it that way. Or if I'm in a conversation and I say that you got me because you're triggering something that wasn't there.
Yes. And sometimes I find like I can't respond to it in the moment because I'm like, I actually need to sit with that a little bit. Like, I want to really process what you said. I might have a few follow-up questions, but I think what's interesting about being a coach sometimes is people come to us and they're like, help me walk through this process. But I think it's just as important that we continue that professional development for ourselves and just openness to the world. Because sometimes it's not in a work setting. It might be you went out to dinner with friends or family, et cetera. But how are we still leaning into the curiosity so that someone does eventually say to you something that makes you say, hey, hadn't heard that before.
And that's one thing. I just love coaching in general. Like it really, when I started coaching, I wasn't at a great place when I started learning about self-coaching. And it was the perspective change was everything for me. And I realized how limited my belief system was beforehand. And I was looking at it through the lens of my trauma, the lens of my childhood, and the lens of my experiences, instead of looking at it from that positive lens or that different lens. And when you look at it from a different lens, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing what you realize that you've been missing, and you did it to yourself without even knowing it.
Here's the funny thing is like I don't know that we just do it to ourselves, right? It's because we are living in a society that has narratives. And from the day that we are born on this planet, we are told what certain things are, who certain people are. And it could be as simple as because of your gender assignment, this is who you will be. Because of your racial group or your religion or your ability level, this is what your life is destined to be. We are told those stories over and over again. Again, it ties back into success. It ties into happiness. People who are successful have done XYZ. People who are happy have these items or have whatever it is. They have
Right.
2.5 or 3 kids,
Yeah.
whatever the number is officially, right? That's what they have to be happy.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that on some level, that when you're young, we do need guidance, right? We're a sponge and we're soaking everything up. But when we're 4 and we're 5 years old, mommy, daddy, grandma, school, whomever, they're pouring in information and you're young, right? So you accept it. I'm learning. This is great. This is how the world functions. Where I then take pause is that as we get older, through your teenage years, your young adult years, certainly by the time you are a full-fledged adult,
Right.
you have an opportunity to pause and be like, this value or idea that I was taught about any given number of things,
Right.
do I actually believe it? And sometimes you will, right? You can say that is core to who I am. It is central.
Right.
And then there are other times you realize you're like, actually, I don't believe this. And then we have this opportunity to really think about if that value, if that belief system serves us as individuals. And I think that's the place that I'm at right now, again, on this authenticity journey, is to say, if it doesn't serve me,
What's it doing?
let it go.
Yeah. Yes. And that's huge because I feel like we hold on to so much that doesn't serve us. And when we let it go, I feel like it's a release. It really is. It's just
Yeah.
it's a mental release. It even feels I'm going like this because I remember when I left my corporate job, like I put in my notice. As soon as I did it, it was like all of those expectations that I put on myself, all of those, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, this is what I'm supposed to
Yeah.
be. It lifted off of me.
I definitely connect with that. And I love that you came back to this idea. It's the release. I feel the burden almost lifted off of me. But here's the thing I think that is also really important in part of this conversation is not only are we releasing something, we're also creating space for something new to arrive.
Yeah, and that's huge.
If we're holding on to something that doesn't serve us, there isn't space in a lot of cases for this thing that actually does. Right? I have negative views about myself. And because I have these negative views about myself, I can't actually see myself in a positive way. I'm not happy about my body type or where I'm at in my career. I hear so many people talk about that, particularly as they're entering their 40s. I'm not where I thought I would be. If I keep holding on to just that idea, there isn't space for what could be.
No, and you're setting yourself up for failure because you have to look at it from that open perspective.
Yeah. And I think it's also being able to help with mindset shifts away from limitations. I don't know who said it, but someone had a quote that said, if you argue for your limitations, you get to keep them. And when you think about that, is so real because you are absolutely right. When you say I can't, you're right.
Yeah.
Because you believe you can't. You haven't tried otherwise, right? And so along those lines, I think that is the path that we're taking, right? It is an exploration, I think, that lasts our entire lives. But like, how do we continue to grow, to challenge ourselves, to be curious, both externally, but then also internally?
So do you feel
if
that
I think about the person oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just gonna say, do you feel that it's like a chicken and egg thing? Do you have to do the internal before the external, or do you think that it could be flip-flopped?
See, I'm a both end person.
Okay. That's why
I don't know that I would ever say it's either or. I think we're simultaneously doing things. We're working on the internal, you're working on the external. You don't get to just tap out of one. I only want to focus on me. So I'm not going to go to work. I'm not going to interact with my family. I'm not going to see my friends like that. Maybe under some rare circumstance, but normally we're doing all of these things and we're on a journey within ourselves. And so it's when people talk about work-life balance, and I don't believe there's such a thing as work-life balance. I think there is work-life integration.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I would love to hear your perspectives on that.
Oh,
But for me, I'm
you
just like,
first.
there isn't a balance. No, I want to hear from you. Tell me what you're thinking.
It's your interview. So for me, so I think I didn't understand work like life integration until I became a entrepreneur, because beforehand I have to work life balance, but it always spills over. The work will spill over to the home life will spill over to the work life, because I was trying to keep it separate. And I'm not two separate people, I'm one person. So
Yeah.
for me to be authentic, I have to be able to work when I feel like I'm 9 to 5. That's generally not always my time. I could work at 10 o'clock at night and be super more productive than I could at 9 o'clock in the morning, for example.
Yeah.
So work life integration for me is not having almost that split personality where you're arguing with yourself and having that internal dialogue of, oh, am I supposed to be this way? Am I supposed to be this way? And you're actually allowed to be authentic. What's your take on that?
Yeah. Boy, I have a lot of thoughts on that. It's complicated for me on a couple of levels. Like, I agree with everything that you just said around I never show up as less than who I am. And
Right.
whether or not I show it to you, I'm still me 100% of the time, all of me. And so I think about days where I've been at work and maybe something's happening at home. I have a daughter. If she's not feeling well, like that is on my mind. If there's something, it could be as simple as, hey, there's a flood in the basement, and that is the thing that's pressing on my mind in this moment. I can't focus completely at work. Those types of things shift away. Because I have arrived at work does not mean that I'm any less me, or that I am not thinking about the things that were happening 5 minutes before I walked in this door. And likewise, when I am home, I could be watching TV with the family and a commercial comes on, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this would be so great to bring in as an example for something at
Right.
work. Like, I was just talking about it.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, there isn't a balance. There isn't a segment that says, I've cut this off. We're home now. I'm not thinking about work. It comes up at the strangest times when you're not thinking about it. I'm driving, I see a billboard, and it triggers something in my mind. And I'm like, oh, that's right. I should follow up with email. Or I might be walking at the park and something comes up that's like a brilliant idea. And so what I'm trying to do right now is just create space for these things to exist, and not, again, fall into this false narrative around what success means if I were to have balance, because that is someone else's definition. Like, I feel quite happy with this integration piece. And I think when I consider who I would want to emulate eventually, I'm not there yet, but like in the future, this idea of being like a digital nomad really speaks to me. Because when I look at some of the things that people have been able to do, you're taking your morning meetings, you may be in a hotel room, or you've gone to a local cafe, and you finish and maybe you go for a lunchtime swim in the ocean. And I'm like, how do I make that my reality? That sounds fantastic. I would like a piece of that. But I think to achieve that, it is an acknowledgement that there isn't a traditional sense of balance. It is integration. You decide what works for you. And I also think that on the balance front, it isn't as simple as, I'm going to spend 50% of my time doing X and 50% of my time doing Y, because it shifts. Yeah. Whether we're talking about work or marriages or even raising kids, things shift. Today, you need more of my attention. Right. Therefore, I'm going to give 70% to this, and then you get maybe 30% over here. Whatever it is, it balances. And the next day, it could shift completely, or the numbers could change. Yep. And so I think we show up based on what makes sense in that moment. And key is, are we giving ourselves the grace to just go with the flow of it?
There is a grace and permission.
Yes, permission for sure.
Permission's huge.
But now that comes back to this idea of success.
Yeah.
I can give myself permission if I've defined success for me on my terms. It feels really hard to give yourself permission if you believe success is based on what someone else has told you, because if you don't meet that mark, you're always behind.
Exactly. And that's why it's important for you to define that success for you. And a lot of times you just have to get rid of all of the fluff, all of the background noise to figure out what that success is, what it looks like, and for you specifically. I know for me, success is this summer, I'm working at the pool. Like I digital, you talk about digital nomad. I got my laptop. I made it so my business is mobile, and I'm going to work at the pool because I can. And because for me, that means that I'm living my life as the integration rather than the balance, because I'm still doing the
Yeah.
things that make me happy. I'm still spending time with my kids at the pool. I'm still doing things that I want to do, and I'm not watering myself down by doing it.
Yeah. So remember I told you a moment ago, I said this is a complicated issue for me
You did.
because I stand behind everything that I just said around getting to authenticity.
Yeah.
And I am also a racial equity person. So it is not something that I think we can pretend does not exist. So whether it is race, ability, religion, weight,
Mental health.
you name it, neurodivergence, you throw in your whatever is the other category for the moment. Being authentic is also incredibly difficult because while we are fighting the battle of what we've already talked about, how do I get in touch with who I am as a person? There is also this other layer that comes on because of society's expectations based on your social identity.
Yep.
And so as I'm saying this, like I don't want to talk out one side of my mouth and then switch over and we're having two separate conversations.
Yeah.
I think they are linked. And there is some responsibility for sure on organizations to also participate in these exercises where they are examining what the norms are, what the policies are that they are pushing forward.
Right.
Are they spaces that even allow people? And I'm not saying you have to be your quote unquote full self, because I think we've weaponized that a bit too in this world right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I
But
agree
is
with
there
that.
space? Should I want to come to work in my authenticity? Can I even do that? Am I going to be penalized because women don't do that? Or, oh, Danielle, you're being really aggressive. That's not a good look for Black women.
Yeah.
You've set a measure of success, norms, etc. on me I didn't ask for.
Yeah.
And even though I may pull back in that moment and I'm saying that doesn't define me, we have to still pay attention to the fact that we are within a system that is also larger than us. And so what is the pathway that we can both create spaces for ourselves to show up more so in our authenticity, but as leaders of organizations, how are you creating a space where people truly feel like they can be included, that they belong, and that they're valued for these distinct things that they bring? And I think about moments in time, particularly where discrimination comes up, where we are choosing to not promote people, not hire them. You mentioned much earlier in the call that you talked about culture fit. That's an exclusionary practice to say you have to fit our culture, because that means we already have a norm around what that culture is. And if you step outside those boundaries for whatever reason, you don't look the part, you don't sound like we do, you don't speak enough of the language well enough, or whatever it happens to be, we're not going to bring you on board. You didn't go to the right college. You're excluding people before they even have a chance to get in the door and demonstrate what it is that they're fully capable of. And it's really challenging for me to ask people to show up in their full authenticity. So I'll give you an example. I was working with a client recently, and they're a great team. And the leader is really committed to inclusion. And she told the team, please, we want you to be your authentic selves. That means we want you to share personal stories about you and tell us what's happening at home and all of these things. So it was such an inviting for the right person.
That's what I was going to say. Not for everyone.
For the right person, because I spoke to one young lady and she said, I really struggle with this. I'm an introvert. I don't actually want to talk about any of these things with such a large group of people. I do better in small, intimate conversations. And I don't know how I can show up in my full authenticity. And so I said, I want to validate what you're saying, but I also want to point out something. I was like, can I offer you a noticing in this moment? Because in what she just said, that is pointing to your authenticity.
Right.
If you are someone who is introverted, can you also honor, and can the leader honor this, that just because you've created this space of inclusion, it does not mean I have to do inclusion on your terms. You
Right.
have again set the measure of success. For her, inclusion meant I'm happy to share, I'm happy to problem solve, but there's certain elements of my life I would prefer to keep private.
Which,
And so
right.
and that's exactly it. It is her right. But when she came down on herself and she's, I can't be authentic in the workplace, I was like, I really need you to name that is part of your authenticity.
Yeah.
That's who you are. You get to define that for yourself.
And I feel like when you give other people the power to define it for you, it's just going to it's not the good road to go down.
Yeah.
Um,
But this is why I also come back to this idea that I don't want to sit in the either or space and I want to be both and. So in this case, if the leader is saying, I have created space to make this an inclusive organization because I have now said you can say whatever you need, you can come with your authenticity, etc. And then they're upset in some cases, not this particular situation, but they're upset with other staff who are not showing up in this world in this way. What you're basically saying is either you do it the way that I designed this to run, or you're not doing it properly. And I'm like, can you see like the dynamic that is evolving from this? You have forced an either or in the name of doing it better, right? I want to be more inclusive. Therefore, this is how we're going to be inclusive. I'm like, did you talk to other members of the team about what they thought was important in this moment and how they want to show up? Because that would be more inclusive than defining it for people, setting up this imaginary sort of yardstick that we're going to measure everything by, and then being disappointed that your people didn't step up.
Right, exactly. Go to your people, ask your people, like, what does inclusivity mean to you? Like, how do you feel included? And really, honestly, just talk to your people, get to know your people, have that open, honest, transparent conversations. And that's when the authenticity is going to come out, when people feel that they can say, you know what, I'm an introvert and I don't feel comfortable doing that, but I'll show up in XYZ, and then that not be held against the person.
Yeah. So there are just a lot of dynamics that play there. And it's always an interesting conversation, but it is also why I fundamentally believe there is not a singular path forward. Because much the same as if you were to gather 20 people around the table and ask them what authenticity meant, what inclusion meant, like all of these pieces, you're probably getting 20 different responses. And that's today, because give it a couple of weeks and people might say, I've been thinking about this, actually has changed for me. Here's what I'm now thinking. So can we create spaces that are flexible enough to, one, honor the multiple perspectives, but two, to be flexible in the sense that they create space for it to shift. Like one of my biggest pet peeves is people that are saying, you said this yesterday, and so therefore that's what we have to go with. And I'm like, are you saying people can't change their minds, that they can't grow? I was like, because ultimately as a team, is that not what we want? People to grow.
So when you said that, seriously, like I grabbed right here and I was like, oh, because I could feel that. That just, you're giving mixed messages is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
And so how do we prevent ourselves, from going down that particular path? And I think, again, it goes back to that curiosity. Again, there may be many ways that one can approach this, but for me, the curiosity will always lead the way, in the sense that if I am wondering what has changed about a dynamic, how we have grown, where we've hit a barrier, like you name it, I'm curious about it. That is all data that I can now use to incorporate into how we move forward tomorrow.
100%. That was a mic drop. That was perfect. So I do want to ask you, I want to ask you two more questions. So real quick, so if your future self, as of today, if your future self came to you and said, Danielle, thank you so much for XYZ, what would XYZ be?
I think the thing that I would say is thank you for leaning into the hard things. I have, over the last couple of years, really been faced with some difficult decisions, with conversations that have seemed like maybe I couldn't figure out how to move forward with them. And to me, the only way through it, an issue, is through it. And so I'm like, that's what I would say is thank you for staying the course in terms of always being willing to step into what is difficult.
That's huge. Oh my gosh, I love that. So what would you say, what if we flip it and say, if you're going back, if you today went back in the past 10 years, what would you tell yourself to encourage yourself to keep going?
You're more capable than you realize. We just talked about success. There was a point in my life I measured myself by other people's standards. Today, I get to say what is important to me and know that I can step into that.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. So before we end, I want to go ahead and give you the floor. Is there anything you can promote your business? You can do whatever. If there's anything that you want to say to our viewers, go ahead. The stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much again, Dee, for this. This was a great conversation. What I will say is I am booking some additional speaking engagements for the rest of the year. So I talk a lot about cultural competencies, equity lenses, organizational development from a racial equity standpoint, and what it means to center that at the heart of your business. So I'd love to connect with people that are interested in having either a speaker out for that or doing some more direct consulting work. And then if you are a leader right now who is really thinking about their own cultural competencies and developing them so that you can better support your team, your organization, please reach out. That is an area that I absolutely love to just be able to dive into with people, and we'll set goals that make sense for you to bring those to life.
That's perfect. And do you want to tell people how they can find you? Of course, we'll go ahead and post it.
My website is www.culture-principles, and that's PRINCIPLES.com.
Love it. Yes. And thank you for all of your work towards this as well, because you're my people. Like I've said it before, I've been always tried to find people that are like-minded, and this is why I love this podcast so much, is because it attracts the people that I really feel need to be heard.
Thank you so much, Dee. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. All right. We'll talk to you later.
Sounds good.